How does parliamentary sovereignty affect international law? If you're curious about how parliamentary sovereignty impacts international law, you're about to uncover some fascinating insights. Let's break it down step by step. Parliamentary sovereignty, a cornerstone of the UK's constitutional system, grants the UK Parliament the ultimate authority to make, amend, or repeal laws without interference from other branches of government, including the courts and the monarch. But how does this domestic power play out on the international stage? First, it's important to note that parliamentary sovereignty does not directly override international law. However, the UK Parliament's ability to pass laws without external constraints can sometimes lead to interesting interactions with international obligations. For instance, if the UK signs an international treaty, it is the Parliament that must enact legislation to implement the treaty's provisions into domestic law. In cases where UK laws conflict with international law, the principle of parliamentary sovereignty means that the courts cannot declare a UK law invalid simply because it violates international law. For example, in the case of Madzimbamudo Villardner Burke, the court held that even if a law passed by Parliament is morally, politically, or otherwise improper, it remains valid and enforceable. However, this does not mean that the UK can ignore international law entirely. The UK often incorporates international treaties and conventions into its domestic law, and while Parliament has the power to change these laws, doing so could lead to international repercussions. For instance, if the UK were to pass a law that contradicts the European Convention on Human Rights, ECHR, it could face criticism and potential sanctions from international bodies. Another aspect to consider is the concept of retrospective legislation. The UK Parliament can pass laws that affect acts that occurred before the law was passed, but this is limited by international conventions. For example, Article 7 of the ECHR prohibits retrospective legislation that leads to criminal sanctions. In practical terms, when the UK interacts with other countries, its parliamentary sovereignty can influence how it negotiates and implements international agreements. For example, the UK's decision to leave the European Union, Brexit, was facilitated by Parliament's ability to pass the necessary legislation to withdraw from EU treaties and laws. This move was a clear demonstration of parliamentary sovereignty in action, as Parliament was able to change and repeal laws that had previously bound the UK to EU regulations. In summary, while parliamentary sovereignty gives the UK Parliament significant domestic power, it does not grant it carte blanche to ignore international law. The UK must balance its domestic legislative authority with its international obligations, and any conflicts between the two can lead to complex legal and diplomatic issues.